And just a few announcements from the local organizing committee for this morning. We've had a couple of requests for, if there's a way to communicate ride shares, getting to the airport, that kind of thing over the next, day or two as everybody goes home. We put up, so there's nothing formal and nothing we could spin up super quick. So the workaround is on the bulletin board that is opposite the registration desk. There's a sign and some papers, and you can put your contact information there, with when you're leaving and where you're headed, and maybe try and organize there. I don't know how well that'll work, but it's something. So hopefully that helps. A couple of other things. Of course, we're having our closing event this evening at 7 o'clock over at Blue Moon at the Waterside Complex. It should be very nice. We're looking forward to seeing you all there. There will be a picture, group photo attempt for all 600 of us, if we can manage that. Around 7:15, we'll have more instructions and a little more detailed instructions with some slides in the preamble to the afternoon plenary session. So please come watch that, be on time so we can get a good group photo of all you wonderful people. The other last thing I want to mention this morning is because there's 600 people and we're in a public location, please bring your badge so that we don't have a bunch of other people coming in and eating all your good food. So thank you very much. With that, I will hand off to Gordon Watts, who will be your moderator this morning. Watts, who will be your moderator this morning.
Good morning. Watts from the University of Washington, and here to chair this morning's plenary session. So we're going to start with a roundtable, building equitable STEM workforce for the future. And I'd like to introduce the moderator, Dr. Kimberly Weatherly, who's Assistant Dean and Director of the William and Mary Center for Student Diversity. Please.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm very interactive. We're excited to be here this morning. Am I correct? Good morning. Once again, I'm Dr. Kimberly Weatherly, Assistant Dean and Director of the William and Mary Center for Student Diversity. Welcome to the STEM Workforce Roundtable. So I'm very interactive. That's who I am. So I won't make you move, but I'm going to ask some questions, and you may have to raise your hand. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. I love it. People raise their hand. So historically, underrepresented students are making waves in STEM, but still face significant challenges in entering the field. These include the lack of funding and resources available for minorities that want to focus on STEM, the lack of accessibility to technology by both low-income students of color and those with disabilities, and the status of the nation's low math and science scores in comparison to other developed nations, to name a few. So here's the deep water I want you to think. How many people can remember having more than 3 Black male teachers throughout their K through 12 experience? Raise your hand. Wow. Okay. How many of your STEM teachers were a person of color, Black, Latinx, or Asian? 10 or more. 10 or more? Okay. 5 or more. 3 or less. Wow. Through my K through 12 experience, I had 1 Black male teacher, I had none in high school, and I had 1 Black female in high school. Professor. How many female professors did you have in your STEM fields during your college experience? At least 7, raise your hand. At least 3? Okay. Maybe 1? Okay. When you think of cartoons on TV, how many characters can you think of that are STEM that represent women or a person of diversity? I saw somebody say nobody. Dora the Explorer, anybody hear of her? If you have kids, grandkids. And Nickelodeon said we wanted to represent Latinx in a female and the Latinx culture. And she's a scientist, am I correct? So of the approximately 200 characters classified as scientists on Disney, only 20 of them were female and even fewer were in more than one episode of the TV show or in a major motion picture. So you might be asking, well, why does that matter? Because students, K through 12, kids, your children, your grandchildren, need to see people who look like them. I'm looking at this room and it really is majority male. So how are we representing and getting females and young girls interested in STEM? And I asked, I said, what is it that you do? So I was sitting here, I hear Jefferson Labs, I passed all the offices, and someone was saying it's high technology, and I'm thinking biology, physics, but also that's computer science, am I correct? And when I work with a lot of students, they're computer science, but I'm gonna be very candid, they like all the sexy stuff. They wanna do all the flyers and program and be creative. No one necessarily wants to do the applications, fits the computers and run the numbers. So those are all the things I want you to think about when we're talking about that pipeline into STEM when we're recruiting minorities, which include women, African-American, Latinx, and Asian. With that, I would like the panel to come up and join me on stage. And I'm going to start immediately to my right and let the panel introduce themselves and what they do and where they're from and your hometown.
AK Schultz, I'm the CEO of SVT Robotics. We're a company that is trying to bring accessibility to robotics in the industrial automation space. And born in Iowa, but I would say Norfolk, Virginia Beach is where I predominantly grew up.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Clayton Turner. I was born in Hampton, but raised in New York State. I'm the director of NASA Langley Research Center, where we reach for new heights to reveal the unknown for the benefit of humankind. And I'm happy to talk to each and every one of you how that impacts your life.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Aurelia Williams. I'm a vice provost at Norfolk State University, a professor of computer science, and the founding executive director for our cybersecurity complex. I was born in Portsmouth, Virginia. So just through the tunnel, I went to Norfolk State as an undergraduate student, and I was happy to return after working at one of those three-letter agencies.
Hello, my name is McKinney. I currently serve for Township of Oakcrest as a training and development officer, but also I'm the operating director of a program called Truth. It's a Truth STEM entrepreneurship program for middle schoolers down in the Norfolk area, and it's under the umbrella of Unreachable Kids College. We like to go into the middle schools and find those students that may have, let's say, been a little overlooked because of maybe SOLs or they don't have the mathematic grades and they've lost interest in math and science. And we revitalize that interest by showing them immersive technology and exactly where the future is going. And we make them look at their Xbox and everything else and say, it's not as hard as you think to actually build this up.
Thank you. So I'm going to start off the questions because we don't have a lot of time. But what was your first introduction to the STEM field?
6 years old, I got a set of Lego bricks. And that set forth my career as an engineer for the rest of my life.
Oh, wow. Just those little blocks.
Just the little blocks, not even the good ones, just the actual ones that were
old
rectangles.
okay.
Yeah. Star Wars came out and I made highly pixelated unrecognizable X-wing fighters other than myself. So
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, so I'll have to say the same, the Lego bricks. There were only 3 colors and you had blocks of 8 and 4. And if you really got lucky, you had the long blocks so you could make something bigger. And so while he had pixelated X-wing fighters, I had things that generally looked like airplanes. So same start for me.
For me, I was introduced to programming on a Tandy 1000. You remember that
Nice.
computer? Oh, did I just date
Nice.
myself? I don't know. But a Tandy 1000 in the 5th grade. And in the 8th grade, I asked for a computer and got a Commodore VIC-20 with that beautiful green monochrome monitor.
nice.
I feel like I started a little bit late. So, my first introduction was really to a very old, and forgive me for not knowing the name of it. I had a friend teach me how to build my own flyers. And because I was very interested in probably more like psychology and writing at the time, I didn't know much about building flyers because of my background wasn't in being a creative. I even thought very analytical. So he pulled me to the side and started to take me through a program of how to build my own flyer. So I was at that tail end that you said, the creative side, not really trying to understand the numbers and all of the technology, the other side of technology. So I'm going to leave it at that point because these are more of the tech side than I am.
Well, that's a very good point. I would not have thought about that. So when we're trying to build those pathways, how important was that creative side? And what did that do? How did that change you and make you improve you in your next steps toward education and in your career?
Well, the first thing it did for me was I started to realize that it wasn't as hard as it appeared. I started to look at how there was a few simple steps to actually building, something from scratch or putting certain pictures and removing different things, backgrounds and things of that nature. And it kind of put me in a situation where I started to think, let me give it a go and try it myself. And what it did was it prompted a part of me or opened a part of me into the creative space that I wasn't really interested in. It was quite unique that technology actually pulled me more into the creative space.
Thank you. Did any of you participate in K through 12 programs that promoted STEM? When I was in high school, it's interesting, my very best friend was still close today. She did NASA programs in Cleveland. I'm originally born and raised in Cleveland. And that set her up for the rest of her life to become an engineer. Every college she went to, she went on full scholarship. Her master's degree was paid for, but she started in high school at a NASA program from 9th through 12th grade in Cleveland, because at that time they have a what do you call it, an area or a plant there.
Center, yes.
I can't recall any real STEM clubs that were in any of my schools, but I was a military brat, so I was in DoD schools, and when I was in the 7th grade in Korea, I wrote my first program on a TRS-80, twin floppy drives, 5 1/4. Thank you very much. And my first computer was an Apple II. So, but really, I don't know that like the whole STEM focus wasn't really a focus. It just, you kind of had to force your way into it, I guess. So I think the opportunities now to just create robotics clubs, sponsor robotics clubs, these things are things that just weren't around when I was growing up.
Yeah, and I'll say, I guess I have to date myself. STEM wasn't a term when I was in school.
Great.
But there was an expectation. And that's where we have the chance to make an impact. The clubs are great because they give you the hands-on activities. We talked about that a little bit, and that's what excites folks, as opposed to writing an equation on the wall and saying, memorize this and then spit it back to me in 2 weeks for the quiz, but experience that. So setting an expectation for STEM, setting an expectation, even more importantly, for finding that thing that excites that student. And that's where we come in because we can be part of that network that fills that student with I-CANs. And that starts from 3 and 4-year-olds all the way up through great grandparents that are ready to go back and try something else.
I actually was in a program called Search. It was a gifted and talented program. And the coordinator was a Black female, and she introduced us to basic coding through the computers that were funded through some type of grant award. It was like a trial kind of thing that she was able to launch and to keep going for a number of years. So I participated in those opportunities, but she often tricked us, into learning programming. And I think that's still the case that we need today. Students learn STEM concepts through interaction, through play. And, the aside is the learning that happens. And that's what allows it to stick with them. I sort of had a recipe, I think, for success in a STEM discipline. I had an aunt who majored in math. And probably when I was in the 5th grade, she was going to work at Lockheed Martin as a programmer. So this is what she did. I had a resource to ask questions and all of that. So she was a role model for me that was very close that I could touch as well.
So for me, I've served about 15 years in the military. Before serving, I went into an ROTC program where they candidly dropped us in the middle of the woods and said use intersection resection to find out where you are. Forgive me for laughing because I remember some of us literally what? It was a training where, in land navigation, you have to know how to navigate terrain. You have to be able to look at a map. You have to be able to find yourself on that map in order to navigate out of it. And that was, they did partner us in the group before, so I don't think they just dropped me out there. So that was my first time inside of ROTC program, experiencing, what we didn't call STEM, but it's a collection of, science, a collection of, resources, mathematics and things, bringing it all together and finding out, get yourself out of here by utilizing mathematics and angles. And you got to get out of there because all they did was blow the horn so you can at least hear how to navigate outside that wood line. But that was the ROTC program was my first time actually experiencing something like STEM in some of the school system.
So I'm hearing some common themes throughout this panel. First of all, accessibility to technology early. How many people had a computer in their home growing up? This is including me, it looks pretty seasoned in here. Okay, but I brought my parents their first laptop for Christmas. As a matter of fact, I brought all their technology. We used to have the phone with the big cord that you wrap around the kitchen. I brought them their first mobile phone. But I always joke with my students that I went to college with a typewriter, but I came out with a floppy disk. So we were right at that cusp of technology. But I hear also mentorship. I hear IoT experiences in a few programs. So those are the things that when you're talking about recruitment and you want to give back and you want to do community service, or you want to start programs that your companies can sponsor, those are the things that should headline. What has your experience been, if any, with working with pre-college students in the STEM fields? And what is their feedback to you about their experience?
So before I answer that, I want to say one thing about anti-STEM. So like I said, 7th grade, first time I wrote a software program. I'm not going to call out the school system that this is, but there's this artificial rule that you have to have algebra trig before you take computer science. If that were the case, I wouldn't have ever written a software program until I was in the 11th grade. And that's just too late, right? So, and frankly, I was appalled at how it was taught. It was almost taught to make people bounce out. And it was really discouraging to watch that is the state of affairs. But the other part about it is I was talking to people in the school system. They said they can't keep computer science teachers because they can get a massively higher paying job. And so who wants to do it? And this is broken. It's absolutely broken. So part of why we try to fill the gap is because if you're not in the STEM academies, you're out. That's my opinion. So it's companies, organizations that have to help fill the gap. And so, what we do as, if anyone knows anybody who wants to come by and see the robot lab, any STEM club, we say yes to. Every employee in my company is encouraged to reach out and participate in any STEM organization. And we've had tons of students come through, and in fact, we start at the high school level or even junior high.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I guess the reaching out to the students is about experiences. We host a number of students on center, but it's more the experience. We don't stand in front and quote equations. When we bring interns on, the first thing we talk about is you're not here to sharpen pencils or make copies. You're here to contribute to mission and having conversations with them if that's happening. And when you ask that question, why do you do it that way? The answer can't be because I've always done it that way. It's a conversation where both parties get to learn. So creating that environment takes each and every one of us, because that inclusion, just like you just heard, that's what's going to get somebody to stay and maybe work through a particular challenge they have because they have a passion in an area. And I just can't help but share, since you said the floppy disk, early in college, I actually had a box of cards, which I learned after dropping them once that you take a marker and go across them. Yeah, so just wanted to share. I had to one up you with my box of cards. So
Punch
that's
cards.
there, yeah.
That's old school.
Yeah, there you go.
There's a few people out there like, what are they talking about?
So at a university that has a tremendous focus in STEM and STEM education, we often have summers full of middle school and high school students on campus in various programs. We host, nano days with the Virginia Museum that's in Portsmouth, geared to younger students. We host high school summer academy. No, that's not right. STEM Summer Academy for high school and middle school students. So that is a 4-week daily program where we allow the students to come to campus and they get an introduction into cyber, quantum physics, nanomaterials, all different kinds of STEM activities through active engagement. So I have participated myself, have been the cyber instructor several years pre-COVID. In this administrative role, I can't do that as much as I used to, but I do know that our partnership with the Girl Scouts, we had a member who was on the board. They would bring the young ladies over and they could earn a badge, a STEM badge. It was pink and green too, but it was very nice. The young ladies would come over, and we've always gotten lots of great rave reviews about those activities, to launch a rocket, to build things with straws using math that they didn't know they were really using math. So the reveal is always just as exciting to us as it is to them as to what they've really learned. We host cybersecurity week-long programs where the students learn forensics by following clues and documenting them and then having to present, because we want to make sure that they are getting an opportunity to engage their power skills as well, which is speaking and presentation and those things.
So I'm gonna speak from 2 places on this one. Unreasonable Kids typically, which is the nonprofit, focusing on that elementary to middle school age. And with that focus, our intention is to make sure that they have that proper exposure to technology and to those mentors inside of the field. And people like AK SVT Robotics is one of our strategic partners that definitely help our kids with coding and understanding that space. But there's a couple other partners we have a few partners like Drone Up that deals with flying drones and delivering, almost trying to work out I would say probably the new DoorDash of drone delivery. And we have a few others. One in particular is Townsend Press, whom I happen to function as the training development officer. What we notice is a lot of times there's a really, most people that are developing technology don't do as much of a proper conversation with businesses and the people that they're developing it for. And what happened is we developed so much for the future and not enough for the immediate future. So you have a lot of businesses struggling with right now problems. So what we learned is as we bring in, different type of people that are college, just graduated from college, and they have this understanding of what's happening right now. They basically come in and they look and they talk to the CEOs, CFOs, and different people in certain businesses. And they take that experience that they have learned in developing technology, and then they listen to our problems and try to develop something for it. We took that model and we have the kids developing their own, basically our own e-commerce coffee brand, where they have to run that brand like a business. And as problems arise, all of that great information that they've been receiving from college students, from going to certain labs and learning about all of this technology, they get to infuse that technology into their business to solve right now problems. That is my statement to that.
When you have someone that comes and takes part of one of your entering programs or new employees starting, how do you nurture, motivate, and retain people of color in the STEM and women in your fields of work?
Well, I don't know if we necessarily do it from just a diversity standpoint. What we do is we make sure that everyone has a voice, right? Just in general. And so for like interns, no pencil sharpening. First day, they are told you will present after your internship to the entire company in a town hall what you did. And it serves to focus the mind. And what's amazing to me is we have had college and high school interns. And one of the kids, he was a junior in college or in high school, gave his briefing, and someone asked him, "So when do you graduate from college?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to be a senior in high school." And everyone was just kind of blown away. Right. So like, it's amazing where talent can come from. It's amazing and it's so hard to find really rare minds. So you have to look for it everywhere. You cannot afford, if you're a business owner, you cannot afford to just look in the normal places because you're crazy to let that pass you by.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about the inclusion. That's a big part of it, but it's also the mentoring, providing somebody a network, because you aren't necessarily going to be with that person 24/7, but you can share some insights, give them a little heads up, and that's informal mentoring and formal mentoring. So we certainly do a lot with inclusion to make that voice be heard, to be part of the project. But the mentorship, it comes not only from our leaders and supervisors, but it primarily comes from each employee on center. There's actually groups that form for mentoring. We had a group write a software code so you can do some mentoring matches, because believe it or not, engineers tend to be a little introverted. So mentoring isn't their first go-to. So surprise, surprise, they wrote a program so folks could match up without having to go through that awkward conversation. So it's things like that, jumping out of the boxes you've heard from across the panel, doing something different Because what we want is we want the amazing to happen across the board.
At the university environment, we have to be concerned with our students being mentored as well as our new faculty being mentored. So we use lots of avenues for that. We have living learning communities where students who have similar majors or similar interests can live together, take classes together, and then the networks build peer mentoring. We have meta majors who take classes. So that would be students all across the STEM disciplines who take the math classes together to build a greater network for the more challenging courses, right? The calculus, Calc 3, differential equations, those type of courses. So those networks build, but peer mentoring happens. So we hire students who pass those classes to offer tutoring to students who are in their first and second years. The other thing that we do is we place our most proficient teachers of STEM disciplines to teach our lower level classes, which is sort of different because some schools will, give the lower level classes to the adjunct professors. However, when you want to retain students in STEM, you have to have faculty who are intentional about it as well and can help the students develop a love for the craft of the work that they are doing. So with that, we also have mentoring for our junior faculty as well. So we have more experience, professors and associate professors, professors who are more proficient in even seeking external funding to support their research in STEM to mentor our younger faculty who are building their research program. And in all of the STEM disciplines at Norfolk State, a research component is required as part of the curriculum. So they have another opportunity to work with a faculty member to actually do research in their discipline before graduating.
Thank you for that. So my other question that kind of tags onto that in tandem, how many people have exit interviews of people who are in STEM, people of color or women, especially if they leave before their program, their internship is over, or if they're just leaving the company? Do we ask why?
No, we have 100% exit interviews, and if you have to hear the exit interviews in order to get better. It's just absolutely necessary.
And a lot of times there's a mandatory exit interview and things will come out, well, I just got a better, position, more money, more time. Nowadays, I can work remote or hybrid. But when we talk about minorities and women, do we ask those specific questions on the interview about what was it like to be the only woman and the person that ran a team? Do we ask those questions about, did you feel nurtured? Did you feel motivated? Was there somebody to mentor you through this process, especially if you're a young professional? One thing, and I always like to give examples, my best friend from high school that did the NASA program, even as she became a seasoned engineer, and if she ran the program and she had her hard hat on and she was at that site, if she was standing with her team, who normally were white males, whoever came up to introduce themselves would always assume that she was not the lead and shake the hand of whatever man was there. And then she would have to step up and say, but no, I'm so-and-so, I am the lead, I'm the person that's emailing you and whatnot. And it was always that shot like, oh, I'm sorry, good to meet you. So a lot of times we assume, and that's why I asked that first question about male teachers, about women teachers, about minority teachers, we're not seeing an indicative across, especially in STEM, from jump from K through 12. And then, like I believe one of the panelists said, by the time you do find a few minorities in STEM, whether they're women or by culture, they can make so much money somewhere else that they're not in the K through 12 situation. And then when they go to different corporations, they feel very isolated. So I did want to pick up on some of the things that the panelists said. Does anyone else, can you speak to your exit interviews if you have them?
Yeah, so I want to talk to that. It's not 100%. That's certainly a goal to talk to everybody, but the questions that we want to ask, is it a push or a pull? It goes to your point. Is there just another great opportunity you want to pursue? Just your time. Some people like to move around, or are we pushing you out the door because we didn't demonstrate inclusion? So, one of our core values at the agency is inclusion. And that means all the things you just heard described. And some of those things are subtle. They're not intentional and overt, but are we creating an environment where that doesn't happen? I don't make the assumption. And I'll give you a somewhat trivial example. So in my position, it's always expected that I will sit at a certain position at the table, right? The head of the table. I intentionally sit at a different spot every time because it's not where you sit at the table, but what you bring to the table. So that includes everybody on center. Now, I'm not here to tell you that I passed the magic wand and everybody thinks, walks, talks like that. But I am here to tell you that we're going to set an environment where if you can't get on that program, then it's the oddity, not the norm. What we want is a norm because, we're human beings, so not everybody's going to be perfect. So finding that opportunity to be inclusive, finding that opportunity to talk. And when colleagues get together, we had a technology that we're using to land on Mars and bring things back to planet Earth. We had an early career person who had was aware of the fires where firefighters had lost their life in Arizona, lost their lives. They lost their lives because these are forest fires. And what they do is they carry a small pack on their hip. And if the fire gets around them, they have to dig a little hole and cover themselves up. That didn't work out. Where the material that we use has to survive entry pulses at high speeds coming into any planetary body. An early career person, I think he was 2 years in, said, what if? Now, in the wrong kind of environment, that would have been no way, we got to do this mission, sit down, do your homework, make copies. But he was encouraged, his team was encouraged to go out and try. So we partnered with the Forest Service and they showed me a video of a test of the device we did. And I had no idea at that time how fast a forest fire moves. So that person's still going to be bruised a little bit, but they have a higher chance of surviving just because they're going to avoid the flame. So that's an example of the benefit. A large Fortune 50 company, their research arm was not providing product to their company, and they were going downhill. They started talking about inclusion investing, investing in people belonging and being part of their culture. It took them 5 years, but they saw the change not only in the culture of the shop, but in their bottom line, So there is value in the diverse thought and diverse mind. So if we want to be successful in things we're doing, if you're going to be successful, you can't afford to set any minds to the side. We need all 7 billion that are willing to go on this journey with us.
Yeah, there's a saying called, I'm sorry, like just running on that, the hippo concept of highest paid person's opinion. That cannot be what wins, right? So like, if you want that junior engineer who knows the thing, who's just sitting in the corner quiet to speak up, you got to force it. You got to make it happen. And you can't just let it naturally happen.
I want to throw some things, just a couple things in there. My kids are a little bit younger, I understand. So my intention, just to hit both questions really quickly, is I have the responsibility to specifically look. I go into a school and I ask the principal, give me the kids that you think are unruly. Give me the kids that you think don't like math or don't like school. Give me the kids that you're having the hardest time actually engaging and finding their interests. Give me those kids and bring them here. And I do that strategically because believe it or not, those are the actual kids that's most interesting, that's most desired to really go out there and do something really great, but they don't know exactly what it is, or they don't know their talents, and they haven't been explored or probed enough to actually get to the bottom root of what they really care about in life. So the first thing in the diversity space, some organizations are designed that have looked at the data and see that there's not enough diversity, and they have the responsibility to go in and find those organizations that need somebody to come in and actually be a part. Our teachers are extremely taxed, and we got to help them. And if we can help them with anything, let's help them by bringing some resources to the school and being a part of that journey in regard to Townsend and Whole Press, I believe in a very active, intentional, innovative leadership style. Know your people, talk to your people, and be a part of their growth and their development. And when they do decide to come to you, actually listen, because that's what's going to actually make the exit interview real. That's when they're really going to tell you why, and hopefully they tell you before it's an exit interview.
And I would just like to add to that, that yes, the exit interviews provides a lot of critical information. And we've used that to build those intentional programs that I mentioned before. And that is how we are able to reduce the number of exit interviews that we have in our STEM discipline.
Thank you for that. So here's one for you. What makes the pipeline leak? You get good people in, what makes it leak? Whether it's you're sponsoring a program for K through 12, you're doing a pre-college, you're doing something in college, or you have professionals that are already working that are coming in. They graduate May 2023. Our graduation is next week. I think Norfolk State graduated last weekend, and they're about to start June 1st. And they're there and they're gone by December 31st. What makes the pipeline leak?
So I'd say discouragement is always the biggest thing, right? So, you know, in websites, there's this concept called bounce rate, right? And someone goes and engages and they cannot engage with whatever the program is and you bounce. And first of all, Ivan's work with True STEM is just amazing. Atiba Whitaker, who was supposed to be here, the work she does to bring these kids who are at risk, it's mind blowing to me. And I have to commend the Norfolk Police Foundation funded these at-risk youth to get into this STEM program, gave them proper laptops. They made these pitch videos on real software products. At the age of 14 blew me away. But to get to the STEM thing, they made these awesome pitches. They were super excited. They'd been to our lab and saw that math isn't about numbers, it's about making things. And they were so pumped to put these things up, and they didn't win. They didn't win. And so Atiba called me and said, what can we do for these kids? Because I'm so afraid they're going to be discouraged because they lost. And so we organized a party. We had the mayor, we had city council, we had us police chiefs there, and all of our employees. And when they came in, we just gave them this big round of applause. And, you know, I just said, hey, listen, guys, you're 14. You just pitched at a national level. And yeah, you didn't win. I didn't start till I was in my 40s. I had to pitch this company 50 times before someone would say yes to me. And you're just getting a start that I wish I had. So I don't know if, Ivan corroborate this, but I think it really reclassified failure for them as a step in the journey rather than being the end, right? So I think that, we talk about intentional, like organic versus intentional. If you just let things happen, then it'll fail. Like if you want to make change, you have to bring energy into the equation. So it's an effort.
Yeah, I think it's important when you talk about the pipeline leaking, because sometimes we focus on a piece of the pipeline. We're going to focus on the high school students, or we're going to focus on the college students or those that are fresh out. What we have to do is make sure there's an opportunity throughout the process, right? Building that network for those students all the way through. And we have to be ready to have that passion for the long haul. This isn't an overnight thing. This is a probably generational thing. And that encouragement is what's going to make the difference.
Right. I just like to say it's a lack of access and opportunity. That's what causes the pipeline to leak. And the only way that we can encourage it is to have each of you to reach out to these students who are trying to get through the pipeline. They need role models, they need mentors, they need people who will invest in them to encourage them, to show them that they can, that the impossible is indeed possible. And that takes all of you, the community.
And I'll leave it with this. I was taught a very valuable lesson one time by a great mentor. He said, some things can be taught, other things must be caught. Stay close to me. He did not have the ego. He knew that he had all of this skill and all of this talent that he acquired over years of experience. But he allowed me to be as close as possible to him to pick on those things, not just the work and the knowledge, but the character and the mannerisms that allowed me to grow and become. And we have to remember, set our egos aside, take on a mentor, take the responsibility to develop someone else, because the next generation is in their court. We have to, give them what we have and let them groom and grow and become just as great as a lot of us are.
Thank you. So I see my time person is giving me that signal, but I did want to allow time for questions for the audience. If you can make your way, there's a mic to my right and my left, your left and right. And if you have a physical limitation, you can raise your hand and we'll bring the mic to you.
It's a race condition here.
Yeah, I had a question, actually, it's directed towards, well, I didn't remember the names, guy on the end. It's
Like
which
loud,
is
please,
that-
so they can hear you back.
one of the things I've observed is that there's a lot of people, the education pipeline is just like, it's people think it's straight. And I've had a lot of luck recruiting people who have gone off and done something else for 10 years. And then they join my research group. And I'd like to hear your comments, but how did you get to where you are after, your 15 years in the military? How do you do that transition? And how do we get other people who have done similar things to do that transition back into STEM fields?
So for me, opportunity kind of changes based on individual experiences. So for me, I had the opportunity to connect with some really great people in the STEM field, kind of through my time serving and supporting the acquisition corps. All of those that know the acquisition corps, it's like 95% civilian, like 5% military. So I get to work with a few people in that space. And people developing so many great technologies, and they're making some really great moves in the civilian roles for the Department of Navy, Lockheed Martin, and otherwise. So for me, it started with just having the initial exposure and then moving more towards trying to find ways to connect. In regard to unreasonable kids, if I can make that transition for you. He spoke about Ms. Whitaker, the founder of Unreasonable Kids, and her passion for the kids kind of pulled me alongside. And that's when I became a part of this organization, a part of that. Going into the schools, I think you were saying you had trouble going into the schools and connecting with the schools.
Well, that wasn't me. In my case, I mainly teach undergraduates and graduate students. So, in my area, we have connection, very good. Well, actually, one thing nobody's brought up is community colleges. That's where we get our people. Yeah.
So can I offer, some of this is sharing when things don't go according to plan. I think we get
that's
too
it.
stuck on there's one perfect path forward and we have to share our plan. And as a proud community college graduate, that is a pipeline that we used to put as a second class path to where we wanted to go. So it's sharing when things don't go well that get those students. I can share that I had 5 careers, yes, 5, before I joined NASA, right? So sharing those non-traditional paths.
So I was a Marine engineer at a merchant Marine Academy, who became an Army officer. the only one in the class that went into nuclear engineering after I got out of the Army. And then somehow I ended up as the CEO of a software company. I have no idea if someone had asked me that that's what I would be doing in 20 years, with no idea. And honestly, like, I'm an old founder, like I had gray hair and my sideburns and getting funded by venture capital. And I'm not a 25-year-old Stanford Silicon Valley guy. So like the path to success can be a winding road.
And I for certain didn't have a straight path. I mean, it might sound that way, but I graduated with a BS degree in computer science and absolutely loathed programming, because that is what I'd done for 4 years, and I did not want to be a programmer. I got a job with one of those 3-letter agencies. I was there, decided to get married. So you see, I'm the only female up here, and we haven't even talked about that work-life balance thing. So I decided to get married, took a temporary duty station down here at Northwest GA in Chesapeake, and then had a child. So I'm supposed to go back to NSA. And I didn't want to leave my family or my children, one child, grandparents, because I wanted my children to grow up with their grandparents. Luckily, I found an opportunity at NSU to start as an adjunct, hired as an instructor. So I've had every rank as a university member, because I was an instructor. And then the dean said, well, if this is going to be a career, you have to go back and get your doctorate. What? Was not on my plan at all. And I will just tell you, when I started my doctoral studies, I had a 7-month-old child and a 2-year-old. So you know, you talk about non-traditional and traveling back and forth to New York with 2 babies thinking, oh, I got to leave my children with my husband. That was a whole thing for me.
Thank you very much. I think you've illustrated the point I was asking about is that there are a heck of a lot of really good people out there who cannot take the traditional path.
Absolutely.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Danarix. I am physics teacher from Puerto Rico. And it's a comment. In my country and a lot of country in the United States, the university and institution bring to the school opportunities in the STEM career for the high school and middle school. And today I represent the Irish Hep Quartet program, where we have more than 15 institutes in universities and laboratories across the United States for training teacher, high school teacher in particle physics and software. We are connected with the Step Up for Physics for Women program for attend the minority. So we have excellent models that we can share with the high school teacher across the nation. Will be a pleasure for us that people are here and are interested to bring this opportunity of his country, call us or writing us for bring an excellent opportunity for the high school teacher. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, so we've talked a lot about mentorship throughout the roundtable. A really good discussion, but really insightful, both from a perspective of kind of getting a foot in the door, of even down to kind of the mannerisms as were said, but also from a representation standpoint of really challenging this, you can't see what you can't, can't be what you can't see. But from the kind of the other side of things, from the mentor side, have you experienced many challenges, and do you think the support's there for mentors when they're perhaps early in the careers, and particularly from marginalized backgrounds, where taking the time out from what they're working on may have an impact on their career and where they're working?
So I encourage people to think of it as investment. right? Because we should all be thinking about succession planning. If we're not thinking about some type of succession planning for your own research, you know, you're going to retire and you want someone to continue what you're doing. So that's a way to build your replacement. And I know a lot of us can, you know, sometimes feel that we're the only one who can, but that's not true. And you always want to invest in the future and encourage them to do the same thing. So it's a way of paying it forward.
And I think that's excellent. And part of it is that when you bring in other folks, it's not taking time away from you, you're learning. Because if you're not learning from folks with different ideas, then you may be the one stuck, not them. So it's an opportunity, it's a gift.
Yeah, I think I'm always trying to think about how to do things at scale, right? So like, you know, mentorship is seen as a one-to-one thing, but as a leader, you have a unique opportunity to institutionalize mentorship. So like, I have about 5 people in my company that I've taken on who are just entering management. And really, what do? At 5 o'clock, I go have a beer with them, right? But every single one of my managers and vice presidents is expected to have that, because frankly, a leader's job is not just to tell people what to do, it's to actually grow future leaders, and that is their job. And if they don't have the self-confidence to be able to teach someone because they're fearful of whether they'll get better than them, they don't deserve to be in the role. So, you know, it really starts at the top, and you've got to put energy into it.
I'll add to that, if you're gonna have a scale company, you have to have quality evaluation programs. And some people say they have them, and you really don't, where you are actually quarterly, evaluating people and communicating, making an active effort. Sometimes you need certain systems in place that's gonna make sure you do that. I used to say this, one who say, you're probably gonna have like 3 people that's gonna work for you, that you're gonna be able to identify. One of them is gonna want to get paid most of our money and do the not work. There's gonna be another guy or gal, and they're gonna be so driven and passionate and interested, and they're gonna move faster than you can give them the vision for. And you're gonna spend most of your time smacking their hand. So stop, do the thing I told you to do. It's the unfocused one, the unfocused one. If they don't get in their feelings, but it definitely be groomed into something that will be a great success. And then, unfortunately, the last one is the one that thinks they're doing better and faster than they can do the job. If they don't give an opportunity, a lot of it needs to be balanced with character. But like you said, you want to scale development. You gotta have a good evaluation system, literally, like I said, stay connected, active, intentional leadership.
Thank you. We have one final question.
Hello. I was wondering, I think for certain fields within STEM, specifically things like physics or mathematics, it's really hard to essentially convince your parents that this is a real career. And I guess that this is not like a fake thing. You know, I personally had a lot of pushback when I was trying to do physics because, well, one of my parents didn't even know what physics was. And the other one was like, no, you should get like a real job, like engineering or something like that. So I was wondering, like, what's the best way you guys think to help students that might be in that situation?
Yeah, so I'll start with, it's a lot of what we already talked about, right? It's who's that network you're surrounding yourself with? Who are you spending time with? Sometimes we get the notion that we like to do a thing, but we don't talk to anybody who's doing that thing. We don't meet people who are doing that thing. That's a big part of finding out, like coming to a conference like this and meeting some of your peers, sharing their experiences with them. And I imagine physicists and engineers, we have the same trait of being a bit introverted. And I'm just reading your body language, just saying, right? So there should be 10 people in here you should make sure you talk to before you leave so you can understand what it means to be in this field. So then you can share it with somebody else who may have a parent that doesn't understand what I want to do. So it's not only how is it going to help you, but how are you going to help somebody else join this group and do amazing things?
Yeah. I was asking it because along those lines, even to this day, I go home and I have to like re-explain to my mom what physics is all the time. And a lot of times I have to sell it through an angle of like, oh, you can do stuff engineering related or like stuff that they're more familiar with. But yeah, as you said, it's hard for me to point at someone that they know and say like, oh, look, this person's doing physics or mathematics or whatever, and they're doing well for themselves. It's not
So,
like-
so tell your mom, you're going to help change the world by looking back 13 billion years into time and start the conversation there. Tell your mom how you're changing the world. Don't tell her how to resolve an equation or do an integral. Tell her how you're changing the world.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for the questions. As we come to a close, I would like you to give a big round of applause to our panelists. I'd like to thank Jefferson Labs for recommending us and inviting us here. Key takeaways I took from the panelists was that we need to invest money in programs in K through 12, but when you invest that money in technology, programming, the teachers that teach, and the people power, so that money needs to be invested. So that's another way your corporations just putting in the money, but making sure the money is allocated appropriately. Programs that encourage minorities, also including women, to go into STEM, to go into teaching, college STEM research opportunities and internships, mentorship. I heard that all throughout the panel, throughout K through 12, college, exit infos with specific questions pertaining to identity within the corporation, within the company. I took a few keynotes from each panelist, just words that stuck with me. Is it a pull or push? That analogy. Are you being pulled away? Your spouse is going somewhere, it's just a better opportunity, or are you being pushed away? That's very important. Creating networks for students and professionals. I tell my students all the time, this is the best time to join a professional organization. Like, I'm broke. Exactly. My registration or my dues may cost me $500. If you're a college student, it may cost $50. We can come up with $50 for you. But as you go to these professional networks and travel, it's exposure, it's networking. You may find an internship. A lot of times they're offering jobs on the spot there and interviewing. So opportunities, life balance for women. Because no matter what, we still have to take 9 months out somewhere along the time. We have to take care of the children. That's just, being candid, that's reality. We have to take away from our families. So how do you balance and keep women in the field as they are raising families? A succession plan just was mentioned. And that's excellent, something I hadn't even really thought about. And last but not least, growing future leaders, creating the opportunities and growing the future leaders. So thank you so much. I believe all the panelists may be around a little bit afterwards if you have questions. And once again, thank you. Please enjoy your conference.
So can I have 5 seconds? If I don't get a chance to talk to you, October 21st, open house, NASA Langley, come and see us.
So I'd just like to thank Dr. Weatherly and the panel again for that wonderful session. And so now we'll move on with the rest of our plenary program. These were not downloaded. So next is Dr. Larry Gladney. Why don't you come up while I get your slide, who will tell us a little bit about ideas for achieving excellent and hip research by minimizing marginalization and increasing belonging. Dr. Larry Gladney, why don't you come up while I get your slide, who will tell us a little bit about ideas for achieving excellent and hip research by minimizing marginalization and increasing belonging. Okay. I'm sorry, it's Windows. I don't know my way around this.
Good morning, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to come to the plenary to talk about all the things you just heard over the last hour, particularly around leadership. The one thing I want to add is that leadership and equity is the really essential piece of what I'm going to talk about. Because we have limited time, I'm going to apologize at the beginning. This is going to be a completely US perspective, although there are lots of things that we could say about the issue here which are relevant around the world. I'm also going to minimize the personal perspectives. I'm only going to talk about things that are really backed by a lot of scientific study by social scientists. So the completely, I think, summary of my personal issue on this, or my personal circumstances on this, are that I'm currently Dean of Science, Professor of Physics, and Dean of Diversity and Faculty Development for Yale University. I use he, him pronouns. And really, the extent of what I can tell you about my personal circumstances at Yale, I'm going to suppress for the time being, because I think a lot of the information that I want to give, I hopefully want to get you interested in exploring for yourself. So if you look at the talk, you'll see lots of links to some of the studies that I'm going to refer to. To begin with, I want to start with operational definitions for diversity and inclusion. And when we talk about diversity, very often people are thinking about the first bullet point here, which is differences in racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, geographic, religious backgrounds, gender, ability. And that's not wrong, because of course it comes to mind very often. But I do want to say that when I talk about placing the studies that look at this into perspectives that are generally acceptable to scientists and engineers, you should be very clear that they are talking about diversity from an operational definition. So it is not the first bullet point, but the second bullet point, which is people with differing opinions, social experiences, political and religious beliefs, and so forth. This is what's referred to in these studies as intellectual diversity. Cultural diversity, which is, or personal diversity, is the first bullet point. And the reason we talk about the second bullet point in those studies is because it is not at all intended to convince you about the morality or ethics of having a more diverse scientific and technical and engineering and mathematical field. What we want to do is to achieve excellence in doing those things that we are actually all here to do, which is to improve research, education, and service in the fields of humanity. The way you do that is with the second bullet point. But because, again, from the American perspective, how you grew up depends an awful lot on what your identity actually is. If you improve on the first bullet point, you actually are also going to improve on the second bullet point. And that's why in the field you will often hear people like me talking about the first bullet point, but in fact it's really the second that's really essential. That's because there are studies that have been accepted by US courts over decades that determine that there is actual information which can be factually and reproducibly determined about the benefits of having increased and improved diversity. Decades of research by organizational scientists, sociologists, economists, demographers show that socially diverse groups, those with diversity of race, ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation, are in fact more innovative than homogeneous groups. It's also true that we now know from social psychologists that people with different backgrounds bring the kinds of perspectives that allow all of us to shape how we value what it is that we do. And then it's also the case that simply interacting with people who are different from us in the way that we think, or the way that we approach problems, the way that we ask questions, allows all of us to prepare better, because we have to anticipate that we're not all going to have groupthink, that we're all going to agree on what's important. For all of these reasons, as I said, the courts have accepted that it is necessary and in fact allowable for universities, colleges, higher education institutions to practice affirmative action. In some cases, this is described by people who are opposed to it as discrimination, but in fact, there is a reason for being conscious as to how we achieve greater social diversity in order to have greater cultural diversity. There's also an operational definition that's used in these studies around inclusion, which is diverse groups can have more internal conflicts This is a necessity because of the benefits of having different points of view and having to necessarily determine how we argue those points of view in a way that convinces others. But inclusion is not a set of steps or a set of policies. It is, in fact, whatever is necessary to harness the benefits of diversity through the intellectual resources that are used to achieve an overall benefit. So in measuring inclusion, in fact, these studies actually can quantify how much inclusion is there and how does it actually operate in a way that makes it possible to bring more value to whatever the organization is trying to do. Inclusive organizations, by definition, create an environment of involvement, connection, and respect. So what does inclusion mean? Well, first and foremost, it means accessibility. You have to serve a vast range of abilities while operating within an extreme range of situations that people might find themselves in actually solving whatever mission, no matter how limited or focused the mission might be for the organization. It's necessary to have diversity. You can't have inclusion if you don't have any diversity among the set of people. And it's also necessary to have equity, and I'll talk more about this. The intersection of all of those in the Venn diagram is a sense of belonging. When people can bring their authentic self to work each day, and that means every day, without fear of reprisal or exclusion, in fact, it's possible to have greater accessibility and ultimately greater diversity. And hopefully that results also in more equity. But I want to state right at the beginning that increasing diversity is not the goal. That people who do these studies are actually determined to convince you that what's necessary is to improve diversity. Without a culture of inclusion and belonging, increasing diversity is transitory at best. We can do programs at our universities, at our national labs, which actually increase diversity, but in fact, it is necessarily going to fail, or at best, it's going to be plodding, very slow in progress. As an example, the number of women who are full professors of physics at universities in the US has been increasing over time. If you look at that rate, though, it exactly tracks the rate at which the number of women getting PhDs in physics has been increasing over time. In short, we've actually done nothing to improve the accessibility of a program that allows women to become full professors of physics, but we do take advantage of the fact that there are simply more of them. Why is that important? Because it says that if we actually look for parity, it would take more than a century to achieve parity at the rate that we're currently on. That's what I mean by plotting. So let's focus in on racism. Where is it acting? And the point here is that it's acting most of the time for most people, despite the fact that they think that it's not acting. Okay? We tend to think of racism as involving racial slurs or hate crimes or overtly racist actions, which are very easily identified and very easily thought of as being wrong. But in fact, most of the damage that's done in actually keeping us from having diverse and inclusive organizations, no matter what those organizations are trying to do, is through what's defined by these studies as systemic racism. This is often invisible to those who are not continually subjected to it. So, for example, the world was outraged by what happened with George Floyd. But of course, it is easy to be outraged when you see someone murdered on an American street in a busy city in broad daylight with full lack of fear that there would be consequences for committing that murder. That is something that is obviously racist and obviously indicates that there's something that's really wrong in terms of what's been happening in the interactions of police with some of our citizens. However, we understand, and this is why I think there is so much opposition to the concept of critical race theory, that if you do these studies that actually trace back how we came to policies or came to actions or came to a set of behaviors that result in something that is overtly racist, it always traces back over time to something that was clearly racist at its beginning, but has become policy or systemic in a way that makes it difficult to recognize that racism was at the core of it. So the fact that we don't have universal health care can be traced ultimately to racism. It's not an economic division, and it's not a political division. The fact that we have mass incarceration, again, ties back to racism. the very origin of police forces within the US system was originated by slave patrols in the South. Every police organization in our country ultimately ties back to what was practiced in the South to return runaway slaves to their original homes. No reparations, no access to affordable education. Again, time after time, if you go back and look at the historical development of these, what you find at the core of it was people who were carrying out either white supremacist ideas or ideas about the inferiority based around racial identity. So some examples, just two, of systemic racism today. Just last week, if you look at the paper, you will see that there was mention in the New York Times of migrants from Africa and Haiti reportedly not being able to utilize the US government's new mobile app to apply for asylum at the US-Mexico border. That's because, and of course, it's no coincidence that it's those two areas of Africa and Haiti. Most of those people are dark-skinned, and they are unable to file their claims because the facial recognition bias keeps the Tech Act from accepting their photos, which is now required to be part of the system. Now, the first study is indicating that you would have facial recognition bias depending on bias in the training data sets was more than 10 years ago. And yet we're still producing apps which have these biases built into them and requiring people to use them as though they were fair. More subtle, I think, but still defined as systemic racism are studies that have been done at Google Corporation, which started back in 1995, recognizing that there was a problem in the tech industry, and particularly in their industry for software, to get leaders who represented more closely the representation across the United States. In particular, they found it difficult to hire African-American and Latina Latinx researchers who were leaders in technology development. When they had the Harvard Business School and the University of California do studies in order to analyze why in 2012, there were a couple of findings that were very clear almost immediately on the basis of Google's own internal data, which they could have analyzed themselves to come to the same conclusions. So the first is that it's harder to recruit and by a factor of 2, harder to retain African-American and Latinx employees if you insist that they work in Silicon Valley, around Seattle, or around Manhattan. Now, I won't go through the reasons for that, but it's very clear that if they had added just 6 more states to the set of places where they do their R&D technology development, the Harvard study shows that they would have improved on their ability to retain those of color at the leadership level by more than a factor of 3. That's simply a question of systemic racism. There is no individual decision by any individual person or set of people that made a policy that came to a conclusion that fewer people of color will be hired. But it is a system that works very effectively for eliminating exactly that set of people. It's simply a recognition that if you actually add places to work in the South or in the Midwest, you can actually have it be more attractive for people to not only come to those jobs, but to stay in them. So there are unconscious biases which are known to be pervasive throughout academia and therefore affect most of us and most of our home institutions or companies. I list a set of them. This one is a personal observation. I don't have studies to indicate how these operate. But in fact, there are people like my colleagues at Yale in the psychology department, Jim Richardson and Jack Video, who've done tons of studies on this and are quite well known for indicating that, in fact, even though we can at the individual level at an individual faculty search, for example, understand how it is that we connect each of these biases to outcomes which in fact do discriminate, because you can see in the numbers that in fact the only difference between people who are matched in terms of all the characteristics that are said to be important for hiring into that faculty position, in fact, are not hired at the same rates, depending on whether they're white or male. This is true for 4 categories of people, right? Those around age, around gender, around race and ethnicity, and of course, by virtue of what's indicated here at the bottom, pedigree bias. That is, those who are coming from institutions where you don't normally hire into faculty positions at institution A if they come from institution B. So I will give one personal perspective there. At our School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at Yale, it's ranked somewhere below number 10. Georgia Tech is ranked usually in the top 5. There's not a single faculty member in our School of Engineering and Applied Sciences who got their PhD from Georgia Tech. So we can understand how it is possible collectively to see the connection between these biases and again, the outcome, but it does not require anyone to be practicing those biases in a way that is definitive. If we want to know more about this, what I do recommend is that you see the study that just came out this month from the National Academies that talks about advancing anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM organizations. We can make use of measures of institutional racism and scientific understanding of social and cognitive processes to actually address what has been a problem that has seemed insoluble. So the first point that they talk about is racialization of organizational structures through specific policies and practices. That is, how is it actually possible to look at our policies and our practices that we think don't have anything to do with race and actually incorporate into them ways that mitigate the racism that actually results because of those policies. As an example, people who say, well, I don't see color, okay? Well, that in fact is not true. It's actually clear that many of us do see and recognize color, and our behaviors do change subtly on the basis of that. So the fact is that if we have a policy or practice that claims that that's what it does, in fact, that's not what it's actually doing. And if we don't address it, in fact, we probably will result in decisions that are very similar to those that were passed. There is a need for leaders to address organizational change at multiple levels in order to produce the kind of cultural change that makes it possible for us to examine these things in ways that allow us to fix them. And then finally, there's collective responsibility across the organization to uphold the values of anti-racism and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let me give just one example. This is a cartoon that if you've gone to the kinds of conversations, sometimes called trainings, that I do, for example, for faculty at the beginning of every faculty search process, you may have seen this, so I apologize for it, but it is an example of what's necessary for us to change. As I said, for those who say they don't see color, I treat everyone the same. But in fact, everyone is not the same. So if there are intrinsic barriers, in fact, we are going to have those barriers be a barrier for some, but not for all. And if we assume that we're actually treating people in a way that gives them the ability to get above the barrier and haven't taken into account the fact that not everyone has or needs the same accommodations, in fact, the barrier is still there. The second part of that cartoon is equitable treatment, but it is not equity. We would claim that we're changing what we do to put a thumb on the scale for some and not for others. So the first is that that is indefensible for very long. In fact, may well be illegal at the end of this academic year, depending on what the Supreme Court decision is around Harvard, North Carolina. But it's also extremely difficult to get it right. We don't know exactly what accommodations people need until we actually understand their needs very well. Again, as part of our hiring process or inclusion in whatever operation that we're trying to carry out, whether it's building a piece of software or being in charge of a hardware development program, we don't really typically know well enough what they need. And so it's really equity that's called for, that is removing the barriers. That's the only way in which, in fact, we can actually have people bring their full set of talents to bear on what it is that we're trying to do. So the key to diversity and inclusion is to have consistent and clear commitment to equity, not around diversity, not around inclusion. Those things will come if we actually are equitable in the way that we treat people. Consistent and transparent decision procedures. One of the most important ways that we exclude people is by having differences by communication, access to information. We also need to provide for internal accountability initiatives that link diversity and excellence. In fact, if you believe that diversity and excellence are linked, you can actually find ways to reward people who are achieving both. Meeting against implicit bias effects. First, everyone has them. In the laboratory, social psychologists consistently show that 70% of white males will produce a decision that is racially biased after being shown pictures of Black males, as opposed to pictures of white males. Implicit biases are not the same as explicit prejudices. You may be the most anti-prejudiced person you know, and in fact still subject to implicit biases. Mitigation requires knowledge and, most importantly, discussion. There is no fixing it unless you're actually talking about it. An inclusive work environment and equitable treatment also requires us to pay attention on outreach and civic engagement. You heard an awful lot about that at the panel just a few minutes ago. And there must be identifiable goals for maintaining a diverse team. If we don't plan for it, it's no surprise that we don't achieve it. And then you must have periodic reviews from the outside that actually determines whether or not you're doing a good job. This is simply an aspect of science that we have not practiced nearly enough. We need to have peer review that tells us whether we're doing well or not so well. Now, the next two, I'm not going to go through in detail. These are all things that you can find from a talk that was given by Brian Nord in a 2016 iChep talk. I've modified these somewhat slightly, but I think they're all necessary for us to take up personally, which is that everybody in this room is a leader. You're chosen yourself or been chosen by others to be here because of your ability to lead on some aspect of what it is that you do. And consequently, when I talk about leadership for equity, it isn't only people who have a title that implies leader. Each of us has connections to other undergraduates, to high school students, to middle school students, to graduate students, to postdocs, to other faculty, to other researchers. And so each of these, I'll simply leave for you to read through, are important. Just very quickly, sharing the air, discussion. Leading into discomfort, discussion, communication. Using both and, everything that's looked at as a zero-sum game is a way in which bias is occurring. Whether we see it directly or not, it is in fact there. Okay? As soon as we say it's only a small pie and everybody can get a share, but not a very big share, and therefore we have to figure out who gets what share, we're going to operate by bias unless we've got specific ways to mitigate it. Using preferred pronouns. I don't like using preferred pronouns, but you should do it because it makes it less likely that someone who does want to use preferred pronouns that are different than might have been expected don't feel as though they are somehow among the minority for doing so. And recognize that intention is not the same as impact. Just because you thought you were doing well and intended to do well doesn't mean that you actually are. Power dynamics are an essential piece of every piece of what it is that we're engaged in, no matter what it is. And we should all speak to our own experiences. That is, don't speak for others, but allow them to speak for themselves. The most important thing, I think, as part of this is intersectionality. All of us have multiple identities, and we decide which ones are more important to us on which particular day, which particular week, which particular month, which particular year. It's important that we don't identify people by what we assume on the basis of what we think their identity actually is. Discussing the message and not the messenger, and then making mistakes. The thing I hear most common around issues of operating in ways that are more inclusive is, I don't know what to say, or I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. And sometimes, being human, we will say the wrong thing. Own it, acknowledge it, actually ask for forgiveness, and go on. And then finally, finding common cause around equity. The fact is that everyone has a stake in this, because as I said, if we don't have diversity and inclusion, in fact, we don't have as much excellence as we could or should. And consequently, this is not a problem for those who are identifying as female, for those who identify as Black, for those who identify as Indigenous. This is a problem that, in fact, involves us simply caring about the future of our fields, no matter what those fields happen to be. So with that, I'll stop and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
No, sorry, we have yes, Attila, if you could, yeah, if you could, please.
So Attila Krasnorke from CERN. I was wondering about the cartoon that you were showing. which I think is a very nice representation of what the goal is. I just kept wondering what it means in various conditions, what removing barriers exactly means. Because one of the examples that people keep bringing up, and I think is a very fair example that I've always been on the positive side on, is where you grow up. So I myself grew up with a physicist father and a mathematician mother. So that was always a big plus in the start of getting into STEM. And the uncomfortable question that I always come to when people say that, well, we should remove barriers, is that, well, how do you remove this barrier or this huge plus that I would always have on people? So if you don't give extra support to people who are less fortunate, then yeah, this difference will always be there.
Well, again, it's an examination of what the actual barrier is, right? So the barrier is not lack of opportunity, it's lack of the actual recognition that, in fact, there is a lot of talent out there that is unrecognized. We heard many of these instances here on the panel. So if we're looking for people with the advantages, as you call them, as the people who are most likely to be first to be chosen for anything, whether it's a new position or to be chosen to be leaders, then in fact, that is the barrier, right? The recognition, as I just pointed out around Georgia Tech, is that we tend to look to the same places and the same set of people with the same set of skills and backgrounds as saying, this is the place where we're most likely to be successful at identifying who the next person to come into our field actually is. So the barrier is not lack of opportunity, it's the fact that we haven't looked around to provide enough opportunity. So anytime you hear someone say in economics, well, we don't hire people from the US because they don't have sufficient math background. Well, that's simply not true, okay? Again, I said I would use not a lot of personal perspectives, right? But one of my jobs is to convince people that in fact the barriers are there that they don't recognize. So one of those is people who say at Yale, when we put out a job ad, we don't have to go looking for people. Everybody who's viable applies because we have the best political science department or the #2 economics department in the country. And then I go through and I do a study in which I see people who were hired in positions at other Ivy League institutions who seem to have exactly the same set of skills that we claimed that we were looking for. And they did not even bother to apply to Yale. Okay, so that's what I mean by barrier, right? Sometimes you do actually have to go looking for people, right? Those of you who are not nearly as old as I am can't remember a show called The Beverly Hillbillies, in which one of the jokes was that the son of the banker who never got a job in his life told me he has to go out and get a job. He decides to be a traveling salesman. The way he did it was to have Jeeves drive him in a limousine up to the corner of a neighborhood and honk the horn and expect people to come and ask for him to sell them their wares, right? And so the barrier is that we do have to actually look for people, not actually assume that people who have the advantages are going to come to us.
Thanks.
We have time for one more quick question. What I would love is somebody who's not yet really spoken up here. There are a lot of you out here, and we've heard from basically the same people like me and Attila over and over again. So it would be awesome to hear from somebody new.
Hey, maybe I can share a quick observation that I made around pronouns recently. So I think especially in kind of an international context, this also becomes a problem of language, because while I'm happy to obviously use pronouns and announce my pronouns in English, in my native language, there's no good way to even speak about a person without referring to their gender. So is there any way to kind of do this without it seeming fake? Because in your native language, you can actually do the same thing.
Again, I think it's possible to understand that there are more creative ways about referring to people. I don't necessarily know that there's a fix to every issue that might come up, but showing an interest is actually part of it. I think, you know, in some cases, simply asking people how they would like to be referred to is an indicator of interest that starts a conversation. But no, there won't be a clean way in which you can actually overcome all barriers, especially when we talk about international. This is why I really wanted to focus in on the US perspectives on this, because here is where there have been lots of studies, and it's actually possible to actually say these are things that we can define in ways that actually make it possible for us to indicate whether it's better or worse to have some particular action. But no, for the international perspective, it's clearly going to be difficult, and I don't have easy answers.
All right, thank you. I'd like to thank Dr. Larry Gladney again for coming and giving this great talk. Next, okay, Simone will tell us a little bit about a holistic study of the WLCG energy needs for the LEC scientific program.
So good morning. This is a bit of a different topic with respect of what we discussed this morning. It has a bit more to do with energy sustainability. So I think a lot of people in the room, if not most, know what WCG is, but I just wanted to give a quick reminder. WCG is a collaboration. The purpose of the collaboration is to provide the distributed computing resources for the needs of the experiments at the CERN Large Hadron Collider. It's a worldwide collaboration. We have 65 MOUs with the various funding agencies. At the moment, 164 sites and 42 countries involved. And this is a geographical representation of the locations of our data centers. Okay, so we operate every day of the week, 365 days a year. So we move and process data all the time. And you see this in the plot. This is the amount of CPU that the WCG sites deliver to the LHC experiments, and they are used in the metric we use, HEPSPEC 06. And it's since, in practice, the beginning of the LHC program. So you see, there is a continuous increase of the resources that are used. So of course, it's great, right? I mean, it shows that we have scalability, we can scale to the needs, we can provide the resources that the experiments require, but it also raises questions. And the typical question I get is, you know, this must be a lot of energy that is used to process this data, and this is rapidly and continuously growing. So do you have this under control? Which of course is a legitimate question. And I think the first thing to do is to understand a bit the scale of this, so at least the order of magnitude. So you can take this plot, which shows the CERN energy consumption every year. And this is about between 1.2 and 1.3 terawatt hours in the years when there is the highest consumption, which is when the LHC complex runs. And you see, in fact, here, there are some years when it's a lot, and some years when it's much lower. Now, out of this, the vast majority of the energy at CERN is used by the accelerator complex in itself. So the LHC accelerator, the SPS, and the PS complex. And the CERN IT infrastructure, so what we use for scientific computing, is within the yellow part, and it contributes to about 5% in average. So might say this is not really a lot, but first of all, it's 5% of a relatively large number. And in addition, and more importantly, CERN provides only 20% of the WCG resources. So there is a factor of 5 to consider here. So in terms of energy needs for the LHC program, the impact of computing is not really negligible, and this is what motivates really this study. There are a couple of disclaimers in those words in red in the title. So as I said, WCG is a distributed infrastructure and is built on top of facilities that are really loosely coupled one from the others. They are in different countries and they are even in different continents. So we do not attempt here to make really a detailed study on a country-by-country basis or even on a site-by-site basis, but rather a more general one, a holistic one.
And the second thing is we discuss only energy here. And for example, we don't discuss the impact on the carbon footprint. It's not because this is not important, but it's because it is rather complicated for our situation. However, there are the single countries and the single institutes are making a lot of interesting studies, for example, on the carbon footprint. I link one here, but if you also went to the facilities track here itself, you have a lot of talks which look into the details of CO2 for computing with a special focus on the facility. Okay, having gone through the disclaimers, then identifying what are the factors that impact the WCG energy needs. There are mainly four. First one is the LHC luminosity, of course. When you have more luminosity, more integrated luminosity, you have more data. When you have more integrated, when you have more instantaneous luminosity, you have more complex events. And those two things increase the needs for compute and storage resources. Then, of course, you have the evolution of the computing models and the software. The computing models and the software, they evolve continuously. You have R&D activities, a lot of focus on software efficiency, and the software efficiency, the performance, and the computing models will play a key role in defining the computing resource needs. Then third, you have the hardware technology. Hardware improves continuously, improves in the direction of energy efficiency and reliability. This plays a factor. And the last one is the facilities themselves, the data center that host the WCG hardware. They are being progressively modernized, and in particular, they improve the power usage effectiveness as part of the innovation. So I'm going through those various factors one by one in this presentation, and I start with the LHC luminosity and run conditions. The LHC program is divided in runs, so you have periods, years of data taking, and periods when you do upgrades to the detectors and the accelerators. And we are now basically at the beginning of run 3, which is what I identified here with this yellow star. And in the plot, you see the amount of data that was archived at CERN in the last 10 to 15 years. And you see very clearly the structure of the various runs. So you have quite a lot of data that is being collected during the run, and not a lot that is being archived during the non-shutdown periods. And this increases over time, right? And this is because of what you see in green in the bottom. This is the integrated luminosity that we collected in the first 2 runs, and the expectations for the runs to come. And you see there is a bigger step function at the time of run 4 and run 5. This is what we call the high lumin LHC phase, when the luminosity, so the amount of data, is going to increase a lot compared to what we have collected so far. And it's not only about the volume of data, but it's also about the event complexity, the data complexity. What you have here is an event from 2011 is a Higgs candidate that you see has a certain level of complexity, a certain number of tracks. This is a simulated event of what we should expect for high luminosity. Is a completely different complexity. And of course, complexity is a driver for CPU time to process the event and therefore CPU needs. Okay, those are the parameters we used in this study. I'm not going to go through any of those details, but I put them there as a reference in case someone wants to go back and try to understand what we used to look at the expectations of the forecast that I'm going to show in this study. What I wanted also to point out is that in this presentation, in this study, we focused really on CPUs rather than storage. And this is because of what you see here in this pie chart. This is the power consumption of the data center, of the current data center at CERN. And 55% of our power goes into data processing, into CPUs for data processing. And there is another 17% in services which also relate to data processing. So at the end of the story, about 70% of the energy in the CERN data center is used to process data, and 20% for disk storage, about 5% for networks, and the energy for tape storage is really marginal. And I think this is also a good representation of what happens in the rest of WCG. There is nothing special in the CERN data center. So we focus here really on CPUs rather than disk. But of course, we could look also at the rest. sorry, CPUs rather than this, yes, but we could do that. Okay, so what are the computing needs, the CPU needs at the time, for the time of high Lumi LHC? So we have to make predictions, of course, and those predictions are part of a process of review of the high Lumi LHC computing needs of the experiments. And this plot, you see the most recent predictions and studies from CMS and Atlas. Those are part of the review process of our scientific committee, the LHCC. They are from 2022, so quite recent, and they reflect also the latest changes in the LHC schedule. Of course, also the other two large experiments in LHC, ALICE and LHCb, will require resources at the time of high Lumi LHC, but for run 4, so 2029, 2030, they will require considerably less than Atlas and CMS. And they are still developing their program for run 5, so there are no firm estimates available for run 5. So in this study, we focus on Atlas and CMS. We consider Atlas and CMS only, but of course, we should make this once more firm understanding comes from LHCb and ALICE. And you see here both Atlas and CMS have predictions in a more optimistic scenario and a less optimistic scenario. Those are the markers in blue and red. And they compare with what we expect from our budget, in the sense that our budget is rather fixed. This is a soft agreement with our funding agencies. And so we have to check and try to make sure that our needs fit in the budget that is going to be available. Now, this process of reviewing and the needs for high Lumi LHC and improving with respect of what we will require is not something that started so recently. I mean, in the second half of the last decade, so about 2014, 2015, we started making the first prediction. And what you have here for 2015 is a plot that I produced myself as Atlas Computing Coordinator for ECFA in 2015. And at that time, with the computing model we had, we were off by a factor of 10 between our needs and what we could expect from our funding agencies. And then, of course, there were several very important changes. The first one is that the computing coordinator changed. We got a real physicist rather than a recycled one like myself. And so you see, we moved from Excel to Python plus root. This was one of the improvements. But the biggest improvement, of course, is that this factor 10 started decreasing because the computing models evolved, the software evolved, we had a better understanding of our needs. And today, in some projections in an optimistic scenario, our needs are compatible with the funding that we have today. So I'm going to show a lot about what will happen in the future, but it's just to mention that a lot happened in the past. And when you put together the needs of Atlas and CMS, this is what you get. This plot is in million of HAPSPEC 06 as a unit, so the CPU needs from now, or actually from the past till the end of run 5. And there is a pessimistic scenario, which is the case when we are not going to be capable to do all the R&D we want to do, and a more optimistic scenario, which is completing and putting in production quite the vast majority of the R&D that we are planning. Now that we know how much CPU we will need in order to understand energy, you have to convert this into watts. Of course, this is in principle a relatively straightforward exercise. We can take a current recent processor, sorry, like this one that I have in here, which is what we have, for example, at the CERN data center. And this processor in the configuration we use per server has a performance value of about a kilo HAPSPEC, an idle power of 120 watts, and a full loaded value of about 420 watts. The efficiency, the CPU versus whole time efficiency, of course, not 100%. WLCG is about 80%, so you have to fold this in, and at the end you get to about 350 watts per kilo HAPSPEC. Now, this is the number we use in this study for a processor of today. But of course, as I said, technology improves, and this is not hopefully what we are going to have in the future. We hope to have something more performant and energy efficient, and this is where the market is going, right? There is a continuous increase of performance, there is an increase, there is a reduction in energy use for more modern processors. Mostly is a mix or compromise between the two. And when we look at the past, the energy consumption per unit of computation for a processor decreased by 50% over the last 5 years. And we assume that this trend will continue in the next years. And of course, because there is an improvement in the hardware efficiency, power efficiency, you also have to take into account what is your hardware replacement strategy. Because of course, this plays a role. If you keep machines for longer, you benefit less from those advantages of technology. And we assume here a 5-year life cycle, which is rather standard in WLCG designs. Now, of course, one has to consider whether this 50% reduction in 5 years is a really good forecast for the future. So our colleagues from Glasgow, they looked at the hardware they bought in the last 5 to 6 years, and they, of course, verified that this 50% increase happened, but it's rather a step function, and it's a step function that comes with a change in technology that was going from Intel to AMD. So the question here is, what is going to be the next step function? Is there going to be a next step function? And more importantly, what is the technology? And the one that, of course, is very interesting and promising is ARM. To be honest, we have been looking in the LHC experiments in particular, have been looking at ARM since over a decade now. This is a presentation from ACAT 2013. But the thing is, at that time, ARM was consuming less power, yes, but it was also much slower than x86. And so when you look at the number of events you can produce per watt, this was not was a bit in the early days, let's say. And also porting the HEP software on non-x86 architectures is not really a trivial task, and it takes quite some time. Now, recently, there has been really a huge increase in performance of mobile devices. And also the LHC experiments have made major progress in porting software to ARM and doing the physics validation. You attended the WLCG workshop for CHEP and several of the presentations of CHEP, but you know what I mean. So the colleagues in in the UK, they then made a study to compare performance and power consumption between similarly spec'd and similarly priced machine, one AMD x86 and another one is ARM64. And you have here the specs of the two machines they used. What they used to measure the performance and power consumption are the real workflows of the LHC experiments that we have now included in our new benchmark, which is called HEPSCO. And this is what they got. So in order to help with the readability of the plot, on the x-axis there is the number of normalized event per kilowatt hour, and on the y-axis there is the normalized event per second. So anything that is on the top right requires less power and is faster. And everything that is in the bottom left requires more power and it's slower. The normalization is normalized by hyper-threaded AMD performance. So the first observation, which might be trivial, is that the hyper-threading AMD makes it faster and more energy efficient. Now, the gains are really workload dependent, and you see here what I mean. Those are the different workloads, and there is a quite distribution depending on which workload we are talking about. Now, if you look at ARM, which are the orange ones, ARM is much more energy efficient, is generally faster than hyper-threaded AMD. And again, there is a big distribution of depending on the workloads. So ARM, the conclusion of this is ARM looks really like a step-changing technology. It really motivates the effort in porting, the effort in validating, and we should try to port and validate the largest number of workflows. Talk to me. This is going to be one of the technologies that WLCG is going to use in the coming year. So the next obvious question is, what about GPUs? We have less experience in that, in WLCG at least, but there is a lot of experience by now from the online teams of the LHC experiments. And this is what it has been presented by CMS. They have an HLD farm, an online farm that is a hybrid of CPUs and GPUs. And 40% of their event processing in online can be offloaded to GPUs. This gives them 70% increase in throughput and 50% more events per kilowatt hours with respect of a CPU-only solution. Now, this is true for the online, but CMS is working also to profit from accelerator-ready code for offline already in round 3 with the aim of something like 10% already this year. And Alice is already using their O2 farm, their online farm, which is also a hybrid of CPUs and GPUs for asynchronous reconstruction now. And you had a talk yesterday from Julio and David with the details of this. So GPUs offer yet another opportunity to reduce the energy needs, and the caveat that, of course, porting the LHC offline software to GPUs is a challenging task. Okay, but now that we know how much energy you need per HEP spec in practice and how this is going to evolve with time, you can transform the plot that I have shown from HEP spec of 6 to gigawatt hours per year, which is what I have done here. It's again a pessimistic scenario, not an optimistic scenario. The peaks of our needs are at the start of round 5. In the pessimistic scenario, this is considerably more than today. It's effectively 400% higher than today. However, in the optimistic scenario, is 50% more than today. Those estimates assume all the conditions that I just mentioned, so 50% improvement in hardware efficiency every 5 years, 5 years hardware life cycle, but they also assume a power usage effectiveness of 1.45 for the facilities, which looks like a magic number, but I'm going to motivate it in the next couple of slides. So, first of all, a definition, the power usage effectiveness is a parameter of specific of a data center. And it basically tells you how much extra power you need for cooling with respect of powering the CPUs. For CERN, the current data center in Mera has a PUE of about 1.45, an average PUE of about 1.45. It is something that varies within the year, of course, because of the winter-summer effect, but the average is 1.45. Worldwide, and this is the plot that you find here from Statista, worldwide, the average data center PUE was 1.55 in 2022. So already we are a bit below average. Of course, the lower the PUE is, the better it is, right? It's already lower than the world average, and you can see how the world average dropped dramatically since the beginning of the century. But unfortunately, it's now quite flattening. It cannot be less than 1 by construction. It is harder to quantify what is the average PUE in WLCG, because one would have to average somehow all the facilities in WLCG. So we use the 1.45 for this study constant over the years, assuming that it is a reasonable number for WLCG. Now, of course, the WLCG facilities are being modernized continuously, and when they are modernized, they also generally reduce the PUE as part of their modernization. The modern data centers, for example, have a PUE below 1.4. And for example, CERN is building a new data center at its predecessor site, so the French site, which is supposed to be in production from October 23, so this year. This is a 12 megawatt installation. 4 megawatts are going to be commissioned already in 2023. And the PUE of this data center, new data center, will be about 1.1. So very close to the limit of 1.6. Not only, but it also includes the possibility of heat recovery. So out of the 4 megawatt, there is a potential to recover 3 megawatts to heat up the buildings of the predecessor sites. So this is an example, but there are many upgrades that are being planned in various countries. And again, if you look at the slides and the presentations of the facilities, There are several that describe their plan to upgrade the facility going in the direction of more energy efficiency. And the impact on WLCG, it's of course quite considerable, and for certain we can estimate it because we know what is the difference between what we have now and what we expect to have in a year from now. So the introduction of the predecessor data center reduces by 30% the CPU energy needs. However, the successful completion of the R&D program of the experiments reduces those needs by another 50%. So when you add them together, it's a quite considerable saving. And you know, I'm not saying that the facilities should not be modernized because 30% is important, but also the software and the computing models should be modernized because it's even more than what you get out of modernizing the facilities. Last two slides are about key performance indicators. CERN has a sustainability plan and program with several key performance indicators. And there is one on energy for the LHC, and here I really mean the accelerator complex. But now you have to read this plot against two scales. On the right scale, you have the energy that is needed by the LHC accelerator in the various years, and you see that those dots increase over time. So the LHC in run 3, run 4, run 5 require more energy than in run 1 and run 2. It's a more powerful machine. However, when you look at the energy divided by the inverse femtobank, so how much energy you need to produce a given amount of data, this decreases quite steeply. So the more you improve the machine, the more the amount of physics per megawatt or per gigawatt improves. So we have done the same, and this is the same plot, but it's not for the LHC, but it's for WLCG. And is the same reading of the plot. So on the right-hand side, on the red, you see the amount of energy that we need in both the optimistic and the pessimistic scenario. And is binned by run. So is the information I have shown already, but instead of being year by year, is run by run. And you see that is the similar trend as we have for the accelerator. The amount of energy that computing will need is going to increase in run 4 and run 5. However, in the pessimistic scenario, this increase is considerable. It's about 100% compared to run 2, but in the optimistic scenario is only 10%, which, given the uncertainties of this study, it basically means that it is flat. It's a rather good message. The other very good message is that if we look at the equivalent of gigawatt hours per inverse femtobarn, as we have done for the accelerator, this is what you see in the blue dots, again in the optimistic and the pessimistic scenario. And you see that this is a log scale, right? So you see that between run 1 and run 5, you have an increase by a factor of 10 of the physics that you can analyze per unit of energy, or the energy that you need in order to process a given amount of physics decreases by a factor of 10 throughout the LHC physics program. And so this brings me to the conclusions. First of all, this study doesn't have the expectation to make, doesn't pretend to make solid predictions. It's really about trends and orders of magnitudes and maybe factors. But what we identify is that the energy needs in heavy computing can be kept under control by leveraging, I would say, 4 pillars. The first one is modernizing the facilities. They go in the direction of more energy efficiencies. Now, note that this is really a capital investment for some of the facilities we are talking about tens of millions. So it is something that needs to be done, needs to be planned, but is a capital investment that you are going to amortize in the next 20, 30 years. Then the second pillar is the improvements in the software and computing models. And this is exactly the opposite. It's a gradual process which brings early benefits, something that you can start leveraging. You don't have to do all the work, but you can start leveraging the benefits of the work you do basically immediately. The third one is the improvements in the hardware technologies and the optimization of the hardware lifecycle strategy. Where again, however, it's back to the previous one, which is you need to invest in software portability. So it goes back to the working on software and optimizing software, as I just mentioned. The fourth one is turning off the air conditioning at chat, which I didn't discuss. I focused on the first three, but I think we have made good progress during the week. I'm confident now that I was a bit less. So each of those pillars is important, but I think the conclusion is the improvements in software and computing models are the area where everyone in the community can contribute, and also where the largest gains should be expected. And in all scenarios, the amount of physics we get out of kilowatts improves. Thanks.
That great talk, especially the end part. I'm also glad that, although you didn't talk too much about it, that you were talking a little bit about the improvements in software efficiency and computing models from the experiments. First question.
Tony Cass. So thanks, Simone. I'm probably going to annoy you, so I'll be careful on the flying back. You talked about gigawatt hours per inverse femtobarn here, and that's true. But if it's interesting following the track, the facilities track, one of the mentions there was that contrary to your 5-year cycle, people are keeping kit a lot longer. And one of the reasons for that, perhaps, is that the WLCG metric is just how many HEP spec hours or petabytes you deliver as a site. So there is no incentive, rather the inverse, from the WLCG point of view, for a site to turn off equipment which is inefficient from a carbon point of view. The other issue that we've discussed in the facilities track is that if you look out over time, the carbon intensity of the kilowatt hours is going to go to zero in a lot of countries. So the embedded carbon in the facilities is going to be one of the things that is going to be more dominant in the carbon costs in the future. So, my question is, should WLCG think about a metric that encourages sites to be carbon efficient in the future, rather than just delivering spec? And maybe everything goes to Norway or somewhere like that, but perhaps we should think about the metric for sites other than just HEP spec or petabytes.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I had it in one of my disclaimers. While I didn't discuss CO2 here, several of our partners and regions and federations are looking into it. And I linked here this presentation from the people from GridBT in a recent conference. And that's exactly the metric they're looking at. They're really looking at the metric which has to do with carbon sustainability and events per unit of CO2, I guess. This is something that in WCG, as a collaboration, we haven't started, but I guess this is the next obvious step to take.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Just before we take the next question. Okay, I think this one might work. Just before we take the next question, we're going to delay the start of the parallel sessions to 11:25, and that will give everybody a little bit of time to get a quick coffee. So speaking of people blocking us from taking coffee, Charles, you have a question.
Thanks. Charles Like at Berkeley Lab. So our use of CPUs is pretty spiky. We're not running at 100% all the time. But when we're sitting at idle, we're still using a lot of power. So have there been any studies to see how much energy we could actually save if we took those idle nodes and aggressively powered them down to some kind of a deep sleep state?
I agree 50%. Our CPUs are not particularly idle. I mean, our data centers, they crunch data continuously. There are activities which are more urgent than others, but there is a background of, for example, multi-carbon simulation, etc., that happens all the time. Now, the question, of course, is still relevant. In the scope of the energy crisis that we had this winter, several of our facilities looked into that with in various ways. Some of them, they reduced the amount of CPUs at the time when the energy, or they had plans to reduce the amount of energy at the time when energy was more expensive. In principle, one could also slow down the machines when they are not used. My experience, at least in WLCG, is that the amount of resources that are used are not a lot. The experiments, they always find a way to use resources for science.
Thanks, Ali. Just nice and quick.
Ollie from Fermilab. So the LHCC is grading us every year purely on CPU efficiency. Is there a chance that we can start moving this process to something that reflects energy consumption and actually the physics we do with it, like kilowatt hour per processed events or something like that?
Yes, and I agree with the comment. I mean, CPU efficiency, like CPU versus hold time, is an easy metric. You can get it from a plot, and they focus a lot on this. We presented this study to the LHCC as well as a review, and they were really interested in the way this direction is going. Our LHCC chief referee is in the room somewhere, so we can discuss this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and last question from Katerina and Son.
It's fine. So I'm wondering how much you think the individual can make a difference here. So optimizing code, doing things that are needed rather than things that I'm going to launch a bunch of jobs because maybe it works and maybe it gives me a different result. So how much of an individual education can we put in the users here to improve things?
So I think, this is what I tried to deliver as one of the main outcomes in the last slide. This sustainability somehow, and this is true for various aspects of sustainability, not just computing, is a responsibility of everyone, where everyone should feel needs to contribute. And that's why we try to identify the areas where single people can contribute. It's a question of education, right? It's difficult for really an individual to understand what is the best he or she can do to contribute. But of course, we have several initiatives we go toward, improving some area of software, improving some area of analysis, monitoring where analyses are inefficient, and making sure that this doesn't happen, they get caught early on, etc. So there are so many areas of software computing for any kind of expertise, so that everyone really can contribute. You don't have to be a super expert in computing in order to make your contribution.
And I think that's particularly true of the audience here. I mean, we are gathered here because we are experts in software and computing and facilities. And for particularly what you were talking about, we can probably have quite a big impact if we set some time aside every year to focus on this. Okay, let's thank Simone again. It was a fantastic talk and discussion. And all the speakers, please run. Oh, but wait, sorry. This is a DOE sponsored conference. Walk to the coffee safely. And at 11:25, the parallel sessions will start.